I'm Charlotte Gray, and I'm the author of The Massey Murder, which is a book about a maid, her master, and a trial that shocked the country. In 1915, Toronto thought of itself as Toronto the Good, but by our standards, it was very far from the good. It was a city that had grown enormously in the last decade, since about the year 1900. It had doubled in population, but it was a very class-ridden society with an elite at the top that totally believed it was absolutely right, and with a surge in working-class immigration at the bottom, immigrants mainly from Britain, but not exclusively, and these were people who were determined to make a new life in the new world and were escaping from the class system in Britain. The Masseys were not part of the sort of old Anglo elite. The Masseys, in fact, had immigrated a few generations earlier from the States, and they were Methodists. So they were not sort of British imperialists, strong Anglicans, fine old Ontario families belonging to all the clubs. Hart Massey, who founded the Massey Manufacturing Company, which had become the biggest agricultural implement manufacturer in the British Empire, and which was the biggest employer in Toronto. So, I mean, it was a hugely important family. Nonetheless, he was not part of the elite. He was not part of the club-going, St. James Cathedral attending, Scottish dinner, St. Andrew's Ball elite of Toronto. When he died in the 1890s, he very proudly said that he'd never stepped foot in a theatre throughout his life. Burt Massey was what was euphemistically known as a man around town. He was somebody who had a diamond stick pin in his tie. He liked driving fast cars, and he was pretty representative, I think, of sort of young men of his period who got away with what they could get away with. By our standards, his behavior was unacceptable because he sexually harassed and tried to seduce this 18-year-old servant. And so we regard that as appalling. In his day, it was sort of seen as what young men did. And frankly, I think for many of his peers, what would be surprising was not that he had played around with an 18-year-old girl, but that the Masseys had employed a young woman who had access to a gun and knew how to fire it. Why did Carrie feel that she had to shoot this man? Why did she feel so threatened by him that even though, in fact, he tried to kiss her and she'd pushed him away and run away, why did she think that he was absolutely bound to follow through? Now, this doesn't become evident. You know, when I was reading all the papers and reading all the research, I still couldn't quite grasp it. And then finally you get to the trial scene. She has this brilliant lawyer. He has built on the story she has told him, and he gets her to tell it in court to a jury in a way that makes it more and more dramatic. And you hear that it wasn't just that Burt Massey tried to kiss her, but she had watched him with a woman who had arrived at this dinner party they'd had 2 days earlier, and she had seen him, or he had told her that he'd been stroking the leg of the woman next door and maybe kissing her. And that's what gave Carrie the idea that he was a man who followed through when he was going to seduce a woman. Did any of this happen? We didn't hear about it until we actually got into the courtroom and heard brilliant lawyer pulled this story out of her. And so that's one of the mysteries of the case. Because as somebody else in that courtroom said, only 2 people were there to judge whether he was telling the truth, let alone Carrie. Only 2 people were there when the shooting occurred, Burt Massey and Carrie, and one of them was dead. So all we have is Carrie's story. Why write about this story nearly 100 years since it happened, and when others, particularly legal historians, have already written about it? Because, you know, every generation reinvents history. Every generation of writer brings to each story, each event, their own priorities, their own assumptions of their period. I'm writing in 2014 with all the experience of a woman who's lived a very privileged life compared to the life Carrie led, where I've had access to education and a sense of being an equal partner with the men I work with, and which was something she never had. So looking back through that lens to try and understand what happens is a fascinating glimpse into how quickly our country can evolve. I'm Charlotte Gray. I'm the author of the book, The Massey Murder, a maid, her master, and the trial that shocked a country.